Teresa of Avila. Saint Teresa of Avila, born Teresa Sánchez de Cepeda y Ahumada, also called Saint Teresa of Jesus, March 28, 1515, October 4, 1582, was a Spanish noblewoman who chose a monastic life in the Catholic Church. A Carmelite nun, prominent Spanish mystic, religious reformer, author, theologian of the contemplative life and mental prayer, she earned the rare distinction of being declared a doctor of the Church over 4 centuries after her death. Active during the Counter-Reformation, she reformed the Carmelite Orders of both women and men. The movement she initiated was later joined by the younger Spanish Carmelite friar and mystic, Saint John of the Cross. It led eventually to the establishment of the Discalced Carmelites. A formal papal decree adopting the split was issued in 1580. Teresa, who had been a social celebrity in her home province, was dogged by early family losses and ill health. In her mature years, she became the central figure of a movement of spiritual and monastic renewal born out of an inner conviction and honed by ascetic practice. She was also at the center of deep ecclesiastical controversy as she took on the pervasive laxity in her order against the background of the Protestant Reformation sweeping over Europe and the Spanish Inquisition asserting church discipline in her home country. The consequences were to last well beyond her life. 40 years after her death in 1622, Teresa was canonized by Pope Gregory XV. At the time she was considered a candidate for national patron saint of Spain, but lost out to Saint James the Apostle. She has since become one of the patron saints of Spain. Her written contributions, which include her autobiography, The Life of Teresa of Jesus, and her seminal work The Interior Castle, are today an integral part of Spanish Renaissance literature. Together with The Way of Perfection, her works form part of the literary canon of Christian mysticism and Christian meditation practice, and continue to attract interest from people both within and outside the Catholic Church. However, not until September 27, 1970 did Pope Paul VI proclaim Teresa the first female doctor of the Church in recognition of her centuries-long spiritual legacy to Catholicism. Other associations with Teresa beyond her writings continue to exert a wide influence. A Santero image of the Immaculate Conception of El Viejo, said to have been sent by her with a brother emigrating to Peru, was canonically crowned by Pope John Paul II on December 28, 1989 at the Shrine of El Viejo in Nicaragua. Another Catholic tradition holds that Saint Teresa is personally associated with devotion to the infant Jesus of Prague, a statue she may have owned. Since her death, her reputation has grown, leading to multiple portrayals. She continues to be widely noted as inspiration to philosophers, theologians, historians, neurologists, fiction writers, artists, as well as countless ordinary people interested in Christian spirituality and mysticism. Speaking to pilgrims from Avila in October 1981, Pope John Paul II said, "It is necessary for the rich legacy left by Teresa of Jesus to be deeply reconsidered so that it can effect a renewal of the inner life of your nation and thereby influence the renewal of life in the entire Church in all its aspects." The giant figure of the great Teresa should act as a strong encouragement in that direction, not only on a local or national scale but also on a universal scale. Early life. Teresa Sánchez de Cepeda y Ahumada was born in 1515 in Avila, Spain. Her paternal grandfather, Juan Sánchez de Toledo, was a Moreno or converso, a Jew forced to convert to Christianity or emigrate. When Teresa's father was a child, Juan was condemned by the Spanish Inquisition for allegedly returning to the Jewish faith, but he was later able to assume a Catholic identity. Her father, Alonso Sánchez de Cepeda, was a successful wool merchant and one of the wealthiest men in Avila. He bought a knighthood and assimilated successfully into Christian society. Previously married to Catalina del Paso y Henao, with whom he had 3 children, in 1509, Sánchez de Cepeda married Teresa's mother, Beatriz de Ahumada y Cuevas, in Guitarrendura. Teresa's mother was keen to raise her daughter as a pious Christian. Teresa was fascinated by accounts of the lives of the saints and ran away from home at age 7 with her brother Rodrigo to find martyrdom among the Moors. Her uncle stopped them on the road as he was returning to the town, having spotted them outside the town walls. When Teresa was 11 years old, her mother died, leaving her grief-stricken. This prompted her to embrace a deeper devotion to the Virgin Mary as her spiritual mother. Teresa was also enamored of popular fiction, which at the time was primarily medieval tales of knighthood and works about fashion, gardens and flowers. Teresa was sent to the Augustinian nun school at Avila. Entry into religious life. After completing her education, she initially resisted the idea of a religious vocation, but after a stay with her uncle and other relatives, she relented. In 1536, aged 18, much to the disappointment of her pious and austere father, she decided to enter the local easygoing Carmelite convent of the Incarnation, significantly built on top of land that had been used previously as a burial ground for Jews. She took up religious reading on contemplative prayer, especially Osuna's third spiritual alphabet, 1527. Her zeal for mortification caused her to become ill again, and she spent almost a year in bed, causing huge worry to her community and family. She nearly died, but she recovered thanks to the miraculous intercession of Saint Joseph, she believed. She began to experience instances of religious ecstasy. Foundations of spirituality. Her reading of medieval mystics consisted of directions for examinations of conscience and for spiritual self-concentration and inner contemplation, known in mystical nomenclature as oratio recollectionis or oratio mentalis. She also dipped into other mystical ascetic works such as the Tractatus de Oratione et Meditatione of Saint Peter of Alcantara, and perhaps some upon which Saint Ignatius of Loyola based his spiritual exercises, possibly the spiritual exercises themselves. She reported that, during her illness, she had risen from the lowest stage, recollection, to the devotions of silence, or even to the devotions of ecstasy, which was one of perfect union with God. See section Mysticism. During this final stage, she said she frequently experienced a rich blessing of tears. As the Catholic distinction between mortal and venial sin became clear to her, she came to understand the awful terror of sin and the inherent nature of original sin. She also became conscious of her own natural impotence in confronting sin and the necessity of absolute subjection to God. Around 1556, friends suggested that her newfound knowledge was diabolical, not divine. She had begun to inflict mortifications of the flesh upon herself. But her confessor, the Jesuit Saint Francis Borgia, reassured her at the divine inspiration of her thoughts. On St. Peter's Day in 1559, Teresa became firmly convinced that Jesus Christ presented himself to her in bodily form, though invisible. These visions lasted almost uninterrupted for more than 2 years. In another vision, a seraph drove the fiery point of a golden lance repeatedly through her heart, causing an ineffable spiritual and bodily pain. This vision was the inspiration for one of Bernini's most famous works, the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa at Santa Maria della Vittoria in Rome. The memory of this episode served as an inspiration throughout the rest of her life, and motivated her lifelong imitation of the life and suffering of Jesus, epitomized in the adage often associated with her, "Lord, either let me suffer or let me die." Embarrassment of Raptures. Teresa, who became a celebrity in her town dispensing wisdom from behind the convent grille, was also known for her raptures, which sometimes involved levitation. It was a source of embarrassment to her, and she bade her sisters hold her down when this occurred. Subsequently, historians and neurologists and psychiatrists like Peter Fenech and Javier Alvarez Rodriguez, among others, have taken an interest in her symptomatology. The fact that she wrote down virtually everything that happened to her during her religious life means that an invaluable and exceedingly rare medical record from the 16th century has been preserved. Examination of this record has led to the speculative conclusion that she may have suffered from temporal lobe epilepsy. Monastic reformer. Over time, Teresa found herself increasingly at odds with the spiritual malaise prevailing in her convent of the Incarnation. Among the 150 nuns living there, the observance of cloister, designed to protect and strengthen spiritual practice and prayer, became so lax that it appeared to lose its purpose. The daily invasion of visitors, many of high social and political rank, disturbed the atmosphere with frivolous concerns and vacuous conversation. Such intrusions in the solitude essential to develop and sustain contemplative prayer so grieved Teresa that she longed to intervene. The incentive to take the practical steps inspired by her inward motivation was supported by the Franciscan priest, Saint Peter of Alcantara, who met her early in 1560 and became her spiritual advisor. She resolved to found a reformed Carmelite convent, correcting the laxity which she had found at the Incarnation convent and elsewhere besides. Guimara da Ulloa, a woman of wealth and a friend, supplied the funds for the project. The abject poverty of the new convent, established in 1562 and named St. Joseph's, San Jose, at first caused a scandal among the citizens and authorities of Avila, and the small house with its chapel was in peril of suppression. However, powerful patrons, including the local bishop, coupled with the impression of well-ordered subsistence and purpose, turned animosity into approval. In March 1563, after Teresa had moved to the new convent house, she received papal sanction for her primary principles of absolute poverty and renunciation of ownership of property, which she proceeded to formulate into a constitution. Her plan was the revival of the earlier, stricter monastic rules, supplemented by new regulations including the 3 disciplines of ceremonial flagellation prescribed for the divine office every week, and the discalciation of the religious. For the first 5 years, Teresa remained in seclusion, mostly engaged in prayer and writing. Extended travels. In 1567, Teresa received a patent from the Carmelite general, Rubio de Ravenna, to establish further houses of the new order. This process required many visitations and long journeys across nearly all the provinces of Spain. She left a record of the arduous project in her Libro de las Fundaciones. Between 1567 and 1571, reformed convents were established at Medina del Campo, Malagon, Valladolid, Toledo, Pastrana, Salamanca, and Alba de Tormes. As part of the original patent, Teresa was given permission to set up 2 houses for men who wished to adopt the reforms. She convinced 2 Carmelite friars, John of the Cross and Father Anthony of Jesus, to help with this. They founded the first monastery of Discalced Carmelite brothers in November 1568 at Teruel. Another friend of Teresa, Hieronimo Gracian, the Carmelite visitator of the older observance of Andalusia and apostolic commissioner, and later provincial of the Teresian order, gave her powerful support in founding monasteries at Segovia, 1571, Baez de Segura, 1574, Seville, 1575, and Caravaca de la Cruz, Murcia, 1576. Meanwhile, John of the Cross promoted the inner life of the movement through his power as a teacher and preacher. Opposition to reforms. In 1576, unreformed members of the Carmelite order began to persecute Teresa, her supporters and her reforms. Following a number of resolutions adopted at the General Chapter at Piacenza, the governing body of the order forbade all further founding of reformed convents. The General Chapter instructed her to go into voluntary retirement at one of her institutions. She obeyed and chose St. Joseph's at Toledo. Meanwhile, her friends and associates were subjected to further attacks. Several years later, her appeals by letter to King Philip II of Spain secured relief. As a result, in 1579, the cases before the Inquisition against her, Father Gracian and others, were dropped. This allowed the reform to resume. An edict from Pope Gregory XIII allowed the appointment of a special provincial for the newer branch of the Carmelite religious, and a royal decree created a protective board of 4 assessors for the reform. During the last 3 years of her life, Teresa founded convents at Villanueva de la Jara in northern Andalusia, 1580, Palencia, 1580, Soria, 1581, Burgos, and Granada, 1582. In total, 17 convents, all but one founded by her, and as many men's monasteries were owed to her reforms over 20 years. Last days. Her final illness overtook her on one of her journeys from Burgos to Alba de Tormes. She died in 1582, just as Catholic Europe was making the switch from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar, which required the excision of the dates of 5 to 14 October from the calendar. She died either before midnight of 4th of October or early in the morning of 15th of October, which is celebrated as her feast day. According to the liturgical calendar then in use, she died on the 15th in any case, which began at sunset. Her last words were, "My Lord, it is time to move on. Well then, may your will be done. O my Lord and my spouse, the hour that I have longed for has come. It is time to meet one another." Holy Relics. She was buried at the Convento de la Anunciación in Alba de Tormes. 9 months after her death, the coffin was opened and her body was found to be intact, but the clothing had rotted. Before the body was reinterred, one of her hands was cut off, wrapped in a scarf and sent to Avila. Father Gracian cut the little finger off the hand and, according to his own account, kept it with him until it was taken by the occupying Ottoman Turks, from whom he had to redeem it with a few rings and 20 reales. The body was exhumed again on November 25, 1585 to be moved to Avila and found to be incorrupt. An arm was removed and left in Alba de Tormes at the nun's request, to compensate for losing the main relic of Teresa, but the rest of the body was reburied in the Discalced Carmelite chapter house in Avila. The removal was done without the approval of the Duke of Alba de Tormes, and he brought the body back in 1586, with Pope Sixtus V ordering that it remain in Alba de Tormes on pain of excommunication. A grander tomb on the original site was raised in 1598 and the body was moved to a new chapel in 1616. The body still remains there, apart from the following parts. Canonization. In 1622, 40 years after her death, she was canonized by Pope Gregory XV. The Cortes exalted her to patroness of Spain in 1627. The University of Salamanca had granted her the title Doctor Ecclesia, Latin for Doctor of the Church, with a diploma in her lifetime, but that title is distinct from the papal honor of Doctor of the Church, which is always conferred posthumously. The latter was finally bestowed upon her by Pope Paul VI on September 27, 1970, along with Saint Catherine of Siena, making them the first women to be awarded the distinction. Teresa is revered as the Doctor of Prayer. The mysticism in her works exerted a formative influence upon many theologians of the following centuries, such as Francis of Sales, Fenelon, and the Port Royalists. In 1670 her coffin was plated in silver. Mysticism. The ultimate preoccupation of Teresa's mystical thought, as consistently reflected in her writings, is the ascent of the soul to God in 4 stages, c. The Autobiography Chs. 10-22. Indeed, Teresa was said to have been observed levitating during Mass on more than one occasion. Teresa is regarded as one of the foremost writers on mental prayer, and her position among writers on mystical theology is unique. Her writings on this theme stem from her personal experiences, thereby manifesting considerable insight and analytical gifts. Her definitions have been used in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Teresa states, "Contemplative prayer, or oración mental, in my opinion is nothing other than a close sharing between friends. It means frequently taking time to be alone with Him whom we know loves us." Throughout her writings, Teresa returns to the image of watering one's garden as a metaphor for mystical prayer. Writings. Teresa's writings are regarded as among the most remarkable in the mystical literature of the Catholic Church. Philosophical works. Christia Mercer, Columbia University philosophy professor, claims that the 17th-century Frenchman, René Descartes, lifted some of his most influential ideas from Teresa of Avila, who, 50 years before Descartes, wrote popular books about the role of philosophical reflection and intellectual growth. She describes a number of striking similarities between Descartes' seminal work Meditations on First Philosophy and Teresa's interior castle. Excerpts. Saint Teresa, who reported visions of Jesus and Mary, was a strong believer in the efficacy of holy water, claiming to have used it with success to repel evil spirits and temptations. She wrote, "I know from frequent experience that there is nothing which puts devils to flight better than holy water." A poem. The modern poem Christ Has No Body, though widely attributed to Teresa, is not found in her writings. Legacy regarding the infant Jesus of Prague. The Spanish nuns who established Carmel in France brought a devotion to the infant Jesus with him, and it became widespread in France. Indeed, one of Teresa's most famous later followers, Saint Teresa of Lisieux, 1875–1898, a French Carmelite, herself named for Teresa, took as her religious name Sister Teresa of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face. Though there are no written historical accounts establishing that Teresa of Avila ever owned the famous infant Jesus of Prague statue, according to tradition, such a statue is said to have been in her possession and Teresa is reputed to have given it to a noblewoman traveling to Prague. The age of the statue dates to approximately the same time as Teresa. It has been thought that Teresa carried a portable statue of the child Jesus wherever she went, the idea circulated by the early 1700s. Patron saint. In 1626, at the request of Philip IV of Spain, the Castilian Parliament elected Teresa without lacking one vote as co-patron saint of Castile. 77 This status was affirmed by Pope Urban VIII in a brief issued on July 21, 1627 in which he stated. More broadly, the 1620s, the entirety of Spain, Castile and beyond, debated who should be the country's patron saint. The choices were either the current patron, Saint James Matamoros, or a pairing of him and the newly canonized Saint Teresa of Avila. Teresa's promoters said Spain faced newer challenges, especially the threat of Protestantism and societal decline at home, thus needing a more contemporary patron who understood those issues and could guide the Spanish nation. Santiago's supporters, Santiaguistas, fought back and eventually won the argument, but Teresa of Avila remained far more popular at the local level. Saint James the Greater kept the title of patron saint for the Spanish people, and the Most Blessed Virgin Mary under the title Immaculate Conception as the sole patroness for the entire Spanish kingdom. Portrayals. They include the following: music, painting and sculpture, literature, drama and film, literature, drama and film, literature, drama and film.